Let's go.
Let's go. Oh, no.
Do you want to?
Sorry. I'll let you.
Next one.
I'm excited and I feel relaxed and I'm ready to party. Don't say sorry. You don't need to do that. You don't need to apologize. It's a fucked up female habit. You don't need to be sorry for anything ever.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is?
I don't have rage issues.
I have nothing to prove to you.
When I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where we are awake. We are awake and we are functioning, and yeah, we're doing great. We're also partying it up all the time. I am Lauren Humphries Brooks. With me, as always, is Karen Peterson. Hello, Karen.
Hi, I definitely did not oversleep this morning. That would be weird.
That would be totally strange. You're kind of just amazing because, you know, you're going out, you're partying, staying out till 4 a.m. I know, I get it.
Wild party last night. It was a 40th birthday party at 5 o'clock on a Friday, and it was over by 8, and I was home by 9. She knows how to be 40.
Woo! Party time. No, you know, you got to get home. You need to get home at a reasonable hour.
Exactly. Exactly. She's doing 40 right.
I have to say, even in my 20s, I was like, well, if we day drink, we can get home at a reasonable hour and go to bed like at a normal time. And then it kind of puts off the hangover a little bit because you're not like still drunk when you're going to bed. So I understand. I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And yet I still managed to oversleep. I don't know.
See, that's the thing, Karen.
Well, no, here's the thing though. I was awake at 5:30. I was wide awake at 5:30, and then I went back to sleep.
Let's see that. Yeah, I was not wide awake at your 5:30. I don't think. Yeah. No, that would have been about 8:30. I just had my COVID shot yesterday, so I was kind of loopy last. I was kind of loopy last night. I'm feeling fine now. I was very like sometime about halfway through watching My Cousin Vinny. I was suddenly like, I feel really weird. I was like, I'm really tired and my head is really hurting. And then like all my body is really hurting. And I was like, oh, that's COVID reaction.
Yeah.
So I went to bed quite early last night, but I slept fine and I'm feeling fine this morning. So not too bad.
Awesome.
So today we're going to start off our month of, it is fall festival season. And so we thought for this month we were going to do a little bit on like fall festival films that premiered places like Venice, TIFF, etc. And these are like some major works, right? So the first film that we wanted to talk about is a film that premiered on September 2nd, 2005 at Venice, and was eventually released in the United States in December of the same year. It was also nominated for all kinds of awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Original Score, and it should have won Best Picture in 2005, but it didn't. And I think that we should talk a little bit about why it didn't. So this is Brokeback Mountain, starring Heath Ledger, Jake Gyllenhaal, Linda Cardellini, Randy Quaid, who I completely forgot was like had a part in this film, and of course it's directed by Ang Lee. So I don't think we probably don't need to go through the synopsis of what this film is about. But this is about two cowboys who meet in the mid 60s and basically are alone for several months up on Brokeback Mountain in Wyoming. And they begin a relationship that then lasts off and on throughout the next several decades. It's a very unique film. It's a gorgeous film, first of all, but it was one of like the first very big films to actually like directly depict this kind of male homosexuality and to do it in a really deep and fascinating way. It was based on a story by Annie Poole. And I think it's such an important film in so many different ways. But before we go into that, like Karen, what are your just feelings about Brokeback Mountain?
Um, so that's overall. So okay, I watched it in 2005. And I did not watch it again until 3 days ago.
Same.
And
Same.
really,
Yeah.
yeah. And I don't know exactly why that is. I know it's a become a quintessential film. And I know that it's very important. I know that when it was released in 2005, I thought it was beautiful, but I don't know exactly why I've never watched it again. Part of it, I'm going to be really honest, is that it's, and like this is a weird thing to be honest about, but it's hard for me to watch Heath Ledger movies. I don't know,
No.
like,
Yeah.
it's like his death, and I mean, it's like I never met him or anything like that, but his death was just like, it's one that should never have happened. And whenever I see him in movies, I just think about that. Like, he should still be with us. This is such a tragedy. And so watching his movies is hard. And so I think that's part of it. The other part is I also have changed a lot since 2005. It was a movie that I appreciated when it came out, but I didn't really understand how important it was. I was young. I was in my early 20s. I was in college. And it, you know, politically and some other things, like I just did not understand why people made such a big deal about that movie back then. Now, watching it again, my eyes are completely open and I see things very differently. And I get it now. So
yeah, to speak to the Heath Ledger thing, I think Heath Ledger's this film really hammered home for me. Just like, I think first of all, it's always sad when anyone dies that young. Second of all, he's such a fantastic talent, and you kind of, it's one of those times where you sort of sit there and go like, imagine if, and what else could he have done, what else would he have done, all of those things. So I think that this film really, really shows just what a talented actor he was, and very restrained, very capable. Like he's such a fascinating performer to watch on screen. And so it's hard, I think, to watch some of his films and to be like, to know what happens to him and be like, he should have had more. we should have had him we should still have him, basically.
Yeah. Well, and what's wild about this is he was only like 23 when he made this movie.
Yeah.
And he died in 2009. And so this is like, he dies 4 years later, and that was 15 years ago. So it's like, just thinking of how much we've been robbed of him in the last 15 years.
And to also speak to that whole thing about the importance of this film, I think I'm with you on this. So I graduated high school in 2004, and so I was 18 when this film came out and when I saw it, and I remember liking it. And I remember it was the first time I think I'd, for me personally, that I'd ever actually seen homosexual sex depicted on screen. And it's not particularly explicit, right? We know what's going on, but nothing is shown really. But it was surprising. Like I remember seeing that as whatever I was, 18 years old, and feeling like, whoa, okay. And I think we could talk about the sex scene a little bit, because I have mixed feelings about how this film depicts homosexuality and male desire. And I think that there are arguments for and against it, but I do remember being quite like, I knew that it was the gay cowboy movie, quotation marks. But I do remember being very surprised by that scene. And I think that part of that was my age, and then also the fact that this was just not something I'd seen on screen before. And I think that maybe that, that dates both of us a bit.
Yeah.
But also, like, you look at a lot of media now, where it's not like we have tons of homosexual sex scenes running around everywhere, and we've talked about the limitations of that, particularly in mainstream media, but it has changed a lot. The representations of homosexuality, queerness generally, has changed a lot over the past 19 years, right? And so watching Brokeback Mountain is, on the one hand, being like, oh, how far we've come, but there's also a sense of how far we still have to go.
Right. Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to mention really quick.
Oh,
yeah.
sorry. I was just going to jump in on the subject of like how far we still have to go, but how far we've come. Just specifically looking at where we're at with mainstream media now. I mean, we go from 2005 being the first mainstream movie to depict boys having sex. I say that with air quotes, but now in TV and film nowadays, it's unusual to not have a gay character or some sort of queer character in a friend group, or or being one of the main characters. We have shows like Our Flag Means Death. We have movies like Bros, mainstream studio movies now that are so completely what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I mean, obviously Hollywood still has a long way to go. Society has a long way to go, but we're seeing this so much more now where it's becoming normal. And it's crazy to think that just started less than 20 years ago. But that just also shows to me, especially, how important that benchmark was of Brokeback Mountain being released. It just makes it feel like that much more important now.
Well, yeah, I absolutely agree. And speaking to that, I think one of the things that I remember quite well, and I, at the age of 18, I was like, this is not cool. I remember quite well the way that Brokeback Mountain was talked about in the media, and the interviews that Jake Gyllenhaal and Heath Ledger did, and the number of times I saw someone, and it was like often someone like Oprah, right?
Yeah.
Or David Letterman or whoever else was doing shit back then, asking over and over and over again, what was it like kissing a guy? How did you manage to do this? All of this. And some of it was more involved than others, but it was this constant, like, this prurient interest in the fact that these two straight actors, right, were kissing each other. And not just kissing each other, playing two people in love, playing two men who fall in love with each other, who have sex with each other. And this just kept on getting reiterated and reiterated and reiterated. And my memory is that both of them handled it really well. And didn't kind of fall into the, oh, it was so weird and gross and everything. It's just like, they're actors. This is what they do, right? Why it's no weirder for them to kiss a woman that they are not involved with, right? But that was one of the things that I remember even striking me in 2005 as being like, well, you would never ask that about a straight love scene. Right. You don't ask those kinds of questions. I remember Ian McKellen actually in an interview saying that, no one ever asked, and Ian McKellen is gay, of course. And he said, no one ever asks me, how can you handle kissing Judi Dench? Right. Like, no one ever asks those questions. So like, why are they asking, the two boys in Brokeback Mountain, these questions? And the number of jokes that went around about, it was the gay cowboy movie. The Saturday Night Live skits, the humor that would get played off, but a lot of it was incredibly homophobic. And was very much like, we're going to make fun of this, this gorgeous love story, right? And this heartbreaking love story. Because isn't it funny that this is a story about two cowboys who have sex? Like, that's kind of what it got boiled down to. And I don't want to say that we have come so far from them, but I do want to say that, most of the interviews that I've seen, say with Taika Waititi and Rhys Darby about doing Our Flag Means Death, the interviewers do not go into that. It's not like, isn't it weird kissing a guy? It's like, no, it isn't. Actually, the closest they come is to say, like, isn't it odd kissing your friend?
Yeah.
But even then, it's much more. I think that there is a certain sense in which the culture has definitely progressed. Maybe not enough, but has definitely progressed in the sense that there isn't this shock anymore. And around Brokeback Mountain, there's a lot of shock.
Yeah.
Inappropriate shock in a lot of ways. Like, why should we be surprised by this? Why should this be a thing that we talk about constantly? It isn't just the gay cowboy movie.
Yeah. No, I was trying to remember something that happened back then. It was a specific interview, but it like popped into my brain and then it left. But yeah, no, I mean, I'm a little bit older than you, so I remember that time. I remember watching a lot of stuff that was coming because I was so fascinated by this movie too. And admittedly, a lot of it was for the wrong reasons. It was like, what? Heath Ledger is doing this movie, and but yeah, I mean, it did feel weird. And especially once I saw it, it felt weird that was all anybody wanted to talk about. It's like there's so much more depth and so much more like going on. Although I will say too that I think because of a lot of that discussion, I was surprised when I was watching it again this week because I remember the sex being a lot more explicit. And I think a lot of it is just because that's all everybody talked about. And so when I was watching it this week, I was like, whoa, this doesn't show nearly as much as I thought it did. And these scenes do not go on nearly as long as I thought that they did.
I have to say there's I think there's a cut scene that I saw recently from, I think it was like Knocked Up or something like that, but it's Jonah Hill going off on like, why did we not get more explicit sex in Brokeback Mountain? and for once I was like, you know what, Jonah Hill, I agree with you. I think that you're right. Like it should have been more explicit.
Yeah. But I think because of the way people talked about it, there was this belief or there's this like false memory that there was more than there was.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think that part of that, honestly, is that this film doesn't pull punches in the sense that it does represent these two men as being passionately in love with each other.
Yeah.
Like it isn't there's torture there and there's desperation, etc. But they are passionate with one another when they actually like are in the same space together. And that's part of what the story is about. And so I think that, yeah, they're and simply like, again, for two big stars at that time, Heath Ledger was huge. They both were huge. Yeah. And to take on these roles and to give these performances and to not, I do think that some of it, honestly, is that people were surprised that they were not ashamed. That there was this lack of, it was like, we're playing these roles, right? They're not responding to it like, oh yeah, it was so bizarre, or this is so weird, or anything like that. They're like, no, we're playing these parts and they're doing it in a very serious and a very intimate way. And the fact that these two big stars are not ashamed of it, I think shocked people a little bit. And so you get more into that, just like, oh, it's so explicit and everything. It's just like, it isn't like, come on, we've seen way worse in mainstream films. So yeah.
Sorry, I know we're spending a lot of time even talking about this, but I also think that one thing that I understand now, being much older and much more aware of the world and myself too, I think that one thing that I have learned over the years, even though I didn't watch the movie again for a long time, one thing that I've learned over the years is not to make assumptions about people's sexuality. And even though Jake Gyllenhaal's never said anything, but he has played queer characters multiple times, and I wouldn't just assume that he's 100% straight. I would not assume that nowadays I would not assume that either of these men are totally straight. I don't believe most people are, but like that's just I don't believe most people are. I think most people think they are, but I don't think they are. But yeah, I think that's the thing too, is so many people just see these macho boys doing this, but now looking at it, it's like I see a lot of people play gay characters and they do it so well, and I'm like, I'm Yes, they're good actors, but also we just can't assume. There's a lot of reasons that people don't come out.
Yeah, and I think, and we've talked about this before, that so in the early aughts and really for until fairly recently, there's been this attitude of like only gay actors should play gay characters,
Right.
etc. And some of that I know actually comes from this place of, we want to give more opportunities to gay actors, to trans actors, etc. To actually, play these roles. But now we're kind of at a point where, and we've talked about people almost being forcibly outed, having to declare their sexuality openly, in order to justify playing a gay character or a straight character or whatever, that you have to say there is still that attitude of straight by default. Like if you don't say, then you must be straight. And what has happened has been this pressure, and I think the pressure comes from the media, comes from fans as well, of almost trying to get actors to out themselves or not out themselves in order to justify the fact that they have played gay characters. Well,
this happened recently with Juliana Margulies, who plays a lesbian on the morning show, and she ends up in a relationship at one point in one of the seasons with Reese Witherspoon. And a lot of people were like, what, they shouldn't be doing that. And Juliana Margulies was like, don't assume people's experiences in history just based on what limited information you know about them.
Yeah. And that's really important. But then as soon as someone says that, it's just like, oh, she must be queer. She must actually be. And then it's like, first of all, it's none of your fucking business. Like,
exactly.
And second of all, there is still the, Rupert Everett has even talked about the limitations that he faces being an out gay man in Hollywood. Ian McKellen has talked about that sense of like, as soon as you come out, you no longer have the option of playing straight.
Right.
And it's like, and at the end of the day, as McKellen had pointed out, as many people point out, it's acting, they're performing, they're pretending, right? And it's so they're no more in love. So, a straight actor is no more in love with a straight actress that he plays a love scene with than a gay actor is in love with the gay actor that he plays a love scene with. It's not real, right?
Exactly.
And that's something that we always have to remember. But yeah, it's interesting how the culture has changed from the time of Brokeback Mountain. So let's talk a little bit about the film itself.
Let's do.
And at least I don't think we need to go through this like from the beginning all the way through to the end. But first of all, you get the introduction of these two characters. And one of the things that struck me in this watch is how quiet they are. And in fact, at one point, like a couple of times, actually, numerous characters say to Ennis, like, when are you going to talk? Like, are you ever going to say anything? And the times when Ennis is most voluble, Ennis is the Heath Ledger character. The times when Ennis is most voluble is actually with Jack, and Jack like kind of draws out things from him and gets him to talk. And he still doesn't say much, but he talks a lot more than a lot of the scenes like later on with his wife Alma, who's played by Michelle Williams. And you get the sense that the only time that Ennis is really comfortable, and he's barely comfortable even then, the only time Ennis is really comfortable is when he's with Jack. And that's the only time that he begins to actually express something beyond just this very taciturn repression, where, rather than expressing any degree of emotion, he's just not going to express any emotion at all. So did you have any thoughts on that performance?
Yeah. I mean, they're both really great performances, but yeah, I think it's really interesting, the silence, really as a clear representation for us of Ennis's repression and pain. Because we come to understand that's why he's so quiet, is because he's had to hold so much in for so long that it's just easier to just not talk. But yet he does such a beautiful job of still letting us as the audience kind of have these peeks into how Ennis is feeling, and
Yeah, it isn't that he's not feeling anything, it's that he's feeling too much. And so
Right.
he has to keep it like this kind of tightly wound
Bottled
ball,
up,
right?
yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because one of the things that we learn about him partway through the film is this experience of his experience as a child, when his father took him to see the man who'd been dragged to death. I think it was Ennis. Yeah, it's Ennis.
Yeah.
The man who had been dragged to death, and the implication, of course, is that these two men who were living on a ranch. The implication was that they were gay, and then the father brings his two sons to look at the body of this man who's been dragged and murdered, in order to like impress upon them what happens, basically. And Ennis
right, like this is why you don't do gay things.
Yeah, and Ennis at one point says, he might have been one of the ones who did it, right? And that's kind of that undercurrent is one of the things that runs throughout Ennis's story, is that he is resisting at every point his actual feelings and his actual desires because of fear. He's terrified of becoming that. And he doesn't think that there is any hope, there's any possibility that he and Jack can have a life together. Even though you get a very strong impression that that is exactly what he wants.
It's all he wants. But we also have to talk about the reality here. They meet in 1963. A lot of the movie takes place over the course of 20 years of their friendship and relationship. And so it ends early 80s, I guess. And so a lot of it takes place in the 70s, but like this is very deliberately set in Wyoming.
Yeah.
And Matthew Shepard was murdered in Wyoming, and this movie comes out 8 years after Matthew Shepard's murder, which happened in 1998. So that's 20 years later than this movie is taking place. And so that's the thing, is like, this is a very real, this isn't just, oh, I saw this happen one time and it could happen to me. This is a very real threat for these guys. This is something that was actively happening up until just a few years before the movie comes out. So it's like, when you look at the timeline, I hadn't even really I don't remember putting together how close this really was to Matthew Shepard. Until I was watching it now, and I was like thinking through, okay, this is where we were in this and this. And I was like, whoa, that's only 8 years. That's not that long, or 7 years. And that just really helps contextualize for me, the fear that Ennis really feels.
Yeah.
And whereas you have Jack, who, it's not like that kind of thing wasn't happening in Texas too, but he's not from Wyoming. He lives in Texas. And he's close to the border. He can do all kinds of things that Ennis doesn't have the freedom to do because of where Ennis lives. So, I was really thinking about that Wyoming setting is so deliberate.
Oh, definitely. But I think that it's interesting that there are several points where Jack says, you can move, you can leave, right?
Yeah.
You can come to Texas. And of course, Jack is trying to get him to leave Wyoming and to come closer to him so that they can actually like have a relationship.
Really be together.
And Ennis continues to resist it. And there are some reasons why he does that, like some external reasons, his own family, his daughters, etc. But there's also, I think, that continuous sense of like, I can't let myself be this. And that really all that he gets, they have a major argument at one point in the show that really he can't see beyond the few months out of the year that they get to see each other, the few fishing trips that they take. I agree with you in the sense that like there's an external reality to what Ennis is experiencing, but there's also an internal one. He's internalized a lot of this. To the point that it has completely arrested him, as even to the consideration that he could have a different life.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things. It would mean giving up a lot. It would mean leaving his home. It would mean leaving his daughters. It would mean risking a lot, including his own life potentially.
Well, because of that lesson that he learned when he was a child, it doesn't just mean physically moving away from his daughters. It means the possibility of never seeing them again, because they might be, they might be unwilling to see him as anything other than, something they can't be around.
Yeah, and it's interesting. This is a film that I don't think ever actually says the word gay.
No.
It says queer once.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a denial. They say to each other, well, I'm not queer. It's like, well, neither am I.
Right.
And I think that's the only time that word is even used, and it's very much treated as a pejorative. And as a denial, is like, this is not what I am. So it's never said they're gay, they're homosexual, they're in love with each other, anything like that. It's never ever spoken. But you get this sense of like that knowledge of the culture around them, because, and I think at one point Ennis talks about, do you ever feel like everybody knows, that people look at you on the street and they just know? And Jack doesn't. Jack even says that. But at one point when we see Jack kind of sort of halfway hitting on a guy in a bar, and all he's doing is offering to buy the guy a drink, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which seems like, okay, this would be a normal thing for two dudes to do, that like they work together, etc. And the guy very much clocks it as being a pickup, and dismisses him, and is very much so. There is this sense of like them existing in a world where they feel like everyone is looking at them and knows the truth. It's that fear that the person that you are can be seen, and it's going to endanger you.
Which I think is something that a lot of people can in some way understand and has experienced. I mean, maybe it's not something like this, but I think most people have had that experience of having something that they feel is kind of like a secret about them that they don't want people to know about, and they feel like everybody's looking at me, everybody knows.
Yeah, everyone recognizes what I am. And when you're talking about something like homosexuality, and particularly male homosexuality in this culture, it's dangerous. It is, you try to pick up the wrong guy
and you can be murdered. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the film really gets at that, and gets at the tragedy of it as well, because they can't be openly themselves.
Yeah.
At least not in the spaces that they exist in. They maybe could if they went to, if they went to someplace like New York, but that's not something that either of these guys are going to be able to do.
Right. Well, and I mean, the reality is too, for these characters, Ennis is the one who is very, very private, keeps, like, as far as we ever know in this movie, Jack is the only person that ever, well, Alma knows too, but like Jack is the only person that knows this about him, because he's the only person that he's ever had a relationship with. Whereas Jack has been, he tries to pick up guys in a bar. He goes down to Mexico to find people to hook up with and things. And Jack, by the end of the movie, ends up murdered. Yeah. And we get that sense that this is why he was murdered. It wasn't just a random thing. It was very much in the style of Matthew Shepard. And that's the thing. He wasn't careful enough, and it cost him his life.
Well, and so let's talk about that a little bit, because one of the things that I think there's a tension for me in this film, and part of it I think is the time period, part of it is the kind of film that it is, but something that's talked about a lot, and that we've talked about a lot, is this issue of queer suffering. That to be queer is to be endangered, and to suffer, and to die, and to not just to die, but to die badly, right? Mm-hmm. Being beaten to death, being attacked for being queer. There were a number of films and stories that came out that dealt with the AIDS crisis as well, that again, it was very much this dwelling in suffering. And I have kind of a uncomfortable sometimes relationship with the way that Brokeback Mountain deals with this, with having Jack beaten to death. And also having that, so, it's never fully acknowledged. Like, we know, like, Ennis knows what happened, Jack's wife knows what happened, but they're not ever going to actually say this is what happened. And so I really like the way that
the real, like the official story is that it was an accident, even though they
he
know
was
it wasn't
on
an
this,
accident.
he was on the side of the road and this happened. And like, even that, like, I love the way that Anne Hathaway delivers that because it's so rote. She's got like such a deadpan delivery of it. And you
Mhm.
do feel like just like, yeah, this is a story that she has taught herself and she has repeated. She knows the reality.
Right.
But that whole that this film leans not terribly heavily, but more into this whole idea of that there is no hope kind of thing. And that's one of the things that bothers me just a little bit about it, and particularly about how iconic it is because it does feel like it's in this tradition of films, even like The Children's Hour, where the whole concept of queerness is attached to and reliant on you're going to suffer and you're going to die horribly. So do you have thought? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. And it's interesting because I think there are two different ways to look at it. I think that is obviously one of them. And I think that especially given the time period that this came out, this is, like I said, it's 7 years after Matthew Shepard, but it's 3 years before California's Proposition 8. So marriage was still illegal gay marriage was still illegal in most of the country. And Prop 8 was really the watershed of once that was overturned. And that wasn't even overturned in 2008. Like that was passed in 2008, and it took a couple years for the courts to throw that out. And so, I mean, this is still in the middle of all of that. And so for the time period, I can see that that way of thinking. For me, though, looking back and remembering that era and stuff, I feel like even though we do get a glimpse of the reality of what really happened to Jack, I feel like really this is less about, oh, to be gay is to suffer, and more about like, hey guys, let's stop making the gay people suffer. I feel like because of the fact that this is really the first mainstream film that depicted this type of relationship, and went as far as it did, I feel like we can look at it, whether this was the intention or not. I feel like we can look at it now as sort of trying to really drive home to people that this shouldn't be the gay experience, that Jack should never have been murdered. And we as a society needed to see that and like right in our faces. It's one thing to know about a lot of people that were murdered for being gay, but it's another thing to spend a whole movie with two characters that we really love and that we really feel for, and then watch one of them be brutally butchered like that. And so I think, for me, I think that's one way to look at it, is just as like really more of a rallying cry of this needs to stop.
Well, and also that sense of unfairness, I guess, between that they should be able to be together. There's no, they should be able to set up a ranch and be ranch hands and run a ranch together and have that relationship, without having the scrutiny and the danger attached to it and the fear attached to it. And they're not able to, and they and I do think one of the things this film does really well that I'd forgotten about completely is this whole, the way that compulsory heterosexuality hurts everybody involved, because you've got their wives who I think are really well represented. Maybe the Anne Hathaway character a little bit less so, but particularly Alma, Ennis's wife. It's not her fault. Like, her husband's gay. He's in love with his friend, right? And she's horrified by this, but also like she's in a position where she has 3 kids with this man. 2 kids, sorry.
She has 2 kids with him, and then she has a third with her second husband.
So she has 2 kids with this man, and she thinks like, okay, this is our relationship, this is what we want. And then she discovers something about him that he's kept completely concealed, and that he's going off and having an affair. Over and over and over again. She knows it, and she doesn't want to talk about it or acknowledge it, and it breaks her heart, because she does love him. Like, I think that's pretty clear, and I think that he loves her as well in a certain sense. But it is this like, it's one of those, it should not be like this. It's not her fault that her husband is gay. And it damages her, and it damages their kids, and it hurts everybody involved, because he's not able to express that openly and to be a different person than the one that like their society basically tells them that he has to be.
Yeah. Well, and so when we first, like, the movie opens with Ennis and Jack going up the mountain for the summer, and there are conversations that they have, one of them being like, so when Jack is like, cool, let's hang out again, and Ennis is like, oh, I'm supposed to be getting married. So he and Alma were already together. They were engaged before this summer happened, and it was basically he was going up to make money and then he was going to go home and get married. And so Alma knew him longer than Jack ever did. And so for her seeing this, because that's how she finds out, is she sees them kissing, and Ennis has come alive in a way that he hasn't been their whole marriage, and they have 2 kids already before he reunites with Jack. No, they have the first kid before he reunites with Jack, and this is how she finds out. And it's that sense of like finding out that your whole relationship has been built on a lie, and that he is, and seeing that he has this passion that she didn't know was there because she hasn't seen it until she sees him with Jack. And so there are those things. And then also, so obviously this is still the 1960s, and so she's not going to say anything, but you get the sense already that their relationship is not going well, and it's really because of the fact that he's so repressed and so depressed over not being able to be who he really is. And so we see these fractures. She's so frustrated. She's the wife the wife and mother who constantly has to do everything, and her husband just can't get off his ass and do things. He goes to work and that's it. He doesn't contribute in any other meaningful way. And then Jack comes along, and then suddenly he's like doing all these things for Jack, and he's still not there, and he's not there in an even worse way. And then eventually when they get divorced and she finally tells him, he comes over for Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever, and she finally admits to him that she knows and that she's always known, and he gets violent with her. And they have to basically like kick him out of the house. Like he has to run off. And so it's for Alma, it's not even safe to know this about Jack or about Ennis, emotionally and physically, because of the fact that he is so repressed that it comes out in explosive ways.
And it is. And so let's talk about that a little bit, because there's this whole thing about internalized homophobia that is running through the entire film, especially for Ennis, and but also for Jack a little bit. But it is this conflict of this fear of how they feel. And so, like, one of the first things that they sort of say to each other is, "I'm not queer." Well, neither am I. And it's like, I think you might be, actually, but it is that, like, we're not going to acknowledge what this thing is. The fact that they never say the words gay or homosexual or anything like that about themselves, that this is something they know about themselves, but that, at one point Ennis like practically talks about as being like this thing that's inside of him, right? That he can't get rid of. And both of them are very tortured about it and in different ways. But one of the things that both about the first kind of sex scene and then also a number of the scenes between them is this combination of violence and desire. That it's like they're practically wrestling each other to the ground half the time. Or they're even, at one point, they're even hitting each other. And they're like embracing and kissing and hitting each other at the same time. And it is this like coming out of this anger that they feel this way for one another. And a lot of it comes from Ennis, but there is that element to Jack as well, that both of them are struggling so much with this idea that they might actually not just desire another man, but be in love with another man. And I think that the film makes it pretty clear that they love each other. The way that they talk about one another, the way that they behave with one another, they do have these deep feelings that this isn't, hooking up particularly. But at the same time, they're tortured by the fact that they love each other.
Yeah. Well, and that even comes out in a scene between Ennis and Alma during when they're having sex, and like this violent impulse in him comes out in a scene with her, with his wife. And I think, and that's when they're still married. But it's, yeah, it's because of the fact that he has to hide this, and in not just that he has to hide it, but that I think if he were given a choice, he would choose to have it taken away. He doesn't want it.
Yeah, and you get that impression, particularly with his character throughout, and it is like, yeah, that the violence that he has with her, I think it's very much that like he knows what he's supposed to feel and he's not feeling it. Like what he's supposed to feel as a straight man, he's not feeling it. He's not feeling the desire for her that he is supposed to.
Right.
And it infuriates him. It makes him angry because it's the reality that he doesn't actually want to look at. But so one of the things that came up about these two characters is this question of whether or not they were gay. And it's an interesting thing because again, this is a film that never defines the two of them directly. Doesn't say, they're gay, they're not gay, they're bisexual, they're this, they're that. I guess that Jake Gyllenhaal at one point said there's two straight men who fell in love, but then later said that these are two gay men. There's been like talk that's like, oh no, they're bisexual, and I think that the excuse, the thing, not the excuse, the idea of them being bisexual is primarily related to the fact that they both marry women. And I think it's one of those things where you're kind of like, okay, but like that doesn't mean that they're bisexual. There is such a thing called compulsory heterosexuality.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, this even still happens today. Lots of people who are actually gay marry into heterosexual marriages, and because of the circumstances they're in, the societal circles they're in, they're not allowed. So yeah, like this is still a thing that happens now, like widespread, I would even say. Yeah. Well, I do think though that there is a possibility, I think there's a possibility that Jack is bi or pan. Like I think he's very much just like, but I think Ennis is absolutely gay. And a big part of the reason is like, sure, he does end up in another relationship after his marriage, but he can't commit to her. That's Linda Cardellini. He can't really commit to her, and he ends up in the movie. By the end of the movie, he's alone, and I think that's because he's just never going to be able to really have a relationship that really fulfills him, because he had that in Jack as much as they could with the limited time that they got to spend together. And then when he finds out about Jack's death and goes to Jack's parents' ranch, that scene where he finds the shirt is just like, to me, that's where, and then you see him go home and he's home alone, living by himself out in the middle of nowhere. Like, to me, that's what drives home that he is absolutely 100% gay. There's no question.
Yeah, but he's also not pursuing any other relationships any other gay relationships. And we see that Jack does. Jack goes to Mexico. He hooks up with the David Harbour character, or it's implied that he does. So Jack does pursue these other relationships. They have an argument about that again, where he's saying like, you might be able to live like this, but I can't, right?
Yeah.
And I do think this is something that would never have been directly defined. Sorry. I do think this is something that would never have been directly defined in the time period. As in 2005, but there is a heavy implication that Jack is it for Ennis. It isn't just that Ennis is gay, it is that Jack is his person. Jack was his person. And everything that he can do or not do about that is like it's moot. Basically, he can't have those feelings for anyone else because it was Jack that really expressed that for him.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I mean, Jack was also his first and only experience being with a man, and I do not believe that Ennis was Jack's first.
No.
Certainly we know he's not his only. And I have to say too, when I said I could see Ennis, or I mean I could see Jack being bi or pansexual or whatever, that's not based on any evidence in the movie. That's just like looking at the type of person that he was. I could see a world where that was the reality for him. The movie itself does not suggest that at all, I don't think.
Yeah, it doesn't suggest that he pursues women outside of Lurleen.
Right.
Yeah, Lurleen, yeah. Who he marries, they have one child, etc. But he makes it pretty clear that their marriage is not really a romantic relationship.
Not at all.
And she seems to not necessarily accept that, but definitely understand that. And so yeah, it's interesting though the way that we talk about these things, because there's the whole debate of like, what are they, right? First of all, does it really matter? No, we don't necessarily have to define them. There's also a lot of language that just wasn't particularly prevalent in 2005. Are they gay or bi or straight? Right. Like those were the three options basically.
Well, and even in 2005,
and bi was very questionable,
right? Yeah, like even in 2005, bi was still like not real, or whatever, which that's a whole other topic for another day. But
we'll talk about that at some point. No, but like that issue of definition and trying to define characters, right? Trying to define the desires of characters. But that also then slides into the way that we define people in real life. So I would say that, at this point, you look at someone like Ennis, just like, yeah, he's gay and he's a demi. And that would fit him. That would fit the way that he is performed, the way that he appears on screen. Jack feels much more like, yeah, he's gay. But it is interesting to like look at that and look at the way the film doesn't attempt to define them at all. And externally, the rest of us are like trying to be like, okay, what is this actually representative of? And ultimately, it's representative of two men who fall in love with each other.
Yeah.
However you want to describe that.
Whatever that means and whyever it is doesn't matter, because the real story is that they have this deep connection. They love each other very, very much. And they really can't be in another healthy relationship with anybody else because of the relationship they have with each other and because of the feelings they have for each other.
And it doesn't slide off into like a friendship or anything like that, where they just decide that it is very much, it's a sexual relationship. But it's also a romantic relationship. And there isn't a point for the two of them where they're like, oh, we'd be better off just being friends with each other. It's like, no, they're not. They're not just friends. They're not going to be just friends.
Right. Well, and the last time that they see each other, they have a big argument because Ennis tells Jack, oh, I'm not going to be able to come out or see you like at the next time that they would normally be meeting because he's got work. And Jack gets very upset about this, and they have this argument over, this just isn't enough. And it's like, but this is all we can do, and that ends up ultimately being the last time that they see each other.
So see, what else would we like to talk about this film?
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. Yeah, I was gonna say the cinematography is fantastic. It's a gorgeously shot film. That was something that was striking, particularly in the early sequences on Brokeback Mountain, and just the sort of isolation of it's interesting because the film uses isolation in a very interesting way, because there is this sense of like everything is scrutinized because you're in an isolated town, you're in an isolated area where everybody knows everybody else's business, right? But on the other hand, that isolation allows them to start their relationship to begin with. They are alone up on Brokeback Mountain. That's the only place that they can really be alone and together. So they have to be like completely separate from everything else in the world, essentially, in order for their relationship to develop. And the use of the cinematography, I think, really, and the landscape really brings that home. of
Yeah.
how confined they are when they're in towns, when they're in cities, how confined / isolated they are. But the isolation of the landscape in itself is something that grants them freedom.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about I would actually like to acknowledge. So the cinematographer on this was Rodrigo Prieto, who was nominated for an Academy Award for this film. It was nominated overall for, let me see, 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director. Ang Lee won Best Director that year. It gets three acting nominations. So Heath Ledger, Jake Gyllenhaal, and Michelle Williams all nominated. And then score was also in there too. Anyway, Rodrigo Prieto, the cinematographer, he did not win for this, but he was nominated. He is also the cinematographer who shot films like Barbie and Killers of the Flower Moon and The Irishman. He's worked with Scorsese a lot. So he is obviously a very talented cinematographer, but I mean, this wasn't even an early film for him. This was mid-career for him. So he was very, very experienced and well established as a cinematographer. And yeah, it's beautiful work. He's been nominated, I think, 4 times. Anyway, very, very talented guy. I just wanted to mention him because, you know, he had kind of a big year last year. So with both with with both Barbie and Killers of the Flower Moon, I mean that's huge. So he's
that's
like I said, he's
yeah.
been nominated 4 times. He's never won an Oscar. I thought he had, but he has not. That's crazy.
That's ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just like looking at this, I'm looking at the films that you just referenced. Killers of the Flower Moon, I mean, is gorgeous as well. So is
Yeah.
Barbie. Barbie is a very different film, obviously.
Yeah. Should we? I mean, but I do think that we need to talk about, as much as we don't want to, we need to talk about what happened with Best Picture.
Yeah. So Best Picture, Brokeback Mountain doesn't win. Crash does.
Yeah.
And everyone is very confused to the point that, like, it seemed, I mean, I know everyone debates, like, but it seemed like Jack Nicholson, who presented Best Picture that year, was quite surprised. Everyone seemed to be quite surprised, but, you know, you do have to ask why. I mean, and I think, you know, so Crash deals directly with racism, right? Brokeback Mountain deals with homosexuality, but I do think that there is the sense that, you know, you can't award the gay cowboy movie. You can't, you know, acknowledge it as being such an important film. And it is a very important film. And it's a film that has had a ripple effect on cinema and on representations in media and on the fact that, you know, you also have these 2 main characters who are manly men, right? They are they're multifaceted. But it's taking place in a milieu that is very masculine and is supposed to be, this is where manly men do manly things. And, you know, we've talked before about how the Western is one of the gayest subgenres, but it is. And so it's interesting that, you know, the Academy then doesn't award this film that had been given so many accolades. And had basically been, like, if I remember correctly, essentially been a shoo-in for Best Picture, and then they don't get that. It does feel like, you know, and you always have to be careful about the Academy and arguing about what Oscars, you know, who deserves what Oscar. But this is a film that has had a much longer reaching impact than Crash ever did. That's for damn sure.
Which happens a lot with Best Picture winners. I mean,
yeah,
so often, if you look back, you know, over the entire course of 96 years now of Academy Awards, that's actually frequently the case. The movies that win Best Picture aren't the ones that have the longest legacy, I guess. And sometimes that's because of sort of this sense of injustice of, like, no, I can't believe that didn't win. So then a movie that didn't win that should have, quote unquote, should have, ends up kind of having this life. I think sometimes the best thing that can happen for a movie is for it not to win Best Picture.
Well, and
Sometimes.
I think that in the case of Brokeback Mountain, there is, so, you know, I hate to say, particularly in 2005, a movie that says racism is bad is a safer bet in a lot of ways than a movie that says homosexuality is okay.
Right. Yeah. No, that's totally true. But I think you also have to consider, and yes, I mean, going into the Academy Awards, it was definitely a very tight race. You had Brokeback Mountain had won a lot of things. It had won the Golden Globe for drama. It had won the Critics' Choice Award. It was National Board of Review. It was, you know, it had won the BAFTA. It had won so many things prior to the Oscars, all the precursor awards that usually are how you kind of can tell what's going to win. But Crash surged at the right time. And it just was a very, I don't know. You also have to remember that half of Hollywood is in Crash. There's so many people that show up in that movie. Because really, to me, in this lineup, so the Best Picture nominees that year are Brokeback Mountain, Capote, Crash, Good Night and Good Luck, and Munich. And to me, the second choice in that lineup is not Crash. It's probably Capote, maybe Good Night and Good Luck, although I think the next best movie in this group is Munich. Actually, that's a beautiful movie, but and a really hard one to watch. But anyway, like, it's actually, Crash is a weird outlier here because the rest of these are all exceptionally good films. Crash at the time felt like it was, you know, this like important movie, but yeah, I've actually not watched that one again since 2005. Because I don't want to. But but that's the thing though, is like I think that I really think what happened is Capote was also surging and Good Night and Good Luck was also surging, and I think Crash just benefited from those two films siphoning enough votes, because Capote also deals a little bit with queerness too, and I think that had siphoned enough votes away from Brokeback Mountain that Crash just kind of came up the middle, and that's how it ended up winning. I don't think that there was a groundswell of like, let's pick the racism movie instead of the gay cowboys. I think it's just kind of how the numbers played out in the end.
I agree with that, but I also think that there's a cultural aspect to it that can't really be ignored. I'm not saying that anyone was sitting around going like, we're going to pick the racism movie over the gay cowboys. Yeah. I don't think that was, yeah, absolutely. But the fact that even in discussing this, we're breaking things down, and well, Capote has these gay elements as well. It does. It's a very queer film. And so is Brokeback Mountain. But so as soon as you begin doing that, you're like, okay, there are different kinds of representations being produced, or there are different kinds of films that are valued or undervalued, etc. So if you've got, as it were, Crash surging, well, why is Crash surging? What is it about Crash that is drawing people in and that is making people like vote for it in other awards, and is getting critical accolades or not getting critical accolades, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think that there is still this element. It doesn't necessarily come down to, oh, it's homophobia. I do think that Crash is a safer film. Yes, in a lot of ways.
No,
it is
I do
much
agree with
safer
that,
film, and it is a much more middle of the road film, and it says a safer thing. And Hollywood, as much as Hollywood likes to advertise itself as being, oh, we're so fucking liberal, Hollywood goes for safety.
Yeah.
And it goes for, I guess, what would now probably be described as kind of middle of the road liberalism. In the sense like, okay, racism bad. Okay, we can say that racism is bad. That's okay. Homosexuality is good. I don't know if we can say that. Right. And I do think that there is definitely that cultural aspect that is running through things. So it might come down to numbers. In fact, it does come down to numbers, but there's also an impression about what deserves what gets, so-and-so has not been awarded for this, so we have to give them attention, things like that.
Sure. But I do think it's worth noting too that Crash was not completely rejected, Ang Lee wins Best Director.
Yeah.
And it wins Best Screenplay, Adapted Screenplay. So, I mean, those are two major awards that are indicators of how a film is doing in the Best Picture race, of course, too. But the fact that Ang Lee wins Best Director, I think, shows that there really still was a lot of support for Brokeback Mountain, too.
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying that there wasn't. I'm just saying that it's interesting the way that these things play out. And I do think that there's a social and cultural aspect to it that doesn't just, it's the numbers are influenced by social and cultural aspects is what I'm trying to say.
Yes. No, I do agree with that. Yeah.
So I think that's probably going to close us out for this week. Any final words on Brokeback Mountain? It is seriously, if you've not seen it like us, like if anyone who's listening to us has not seen it recently, go and watch it. It really is a spectacular film.
If you've never seen it, definitely watch it. Sorry, we spoiled the ending, but not really sorry because you should have watched it now. It's been almost 20 years. But also, yeah, if you haven't seen it in a long time, or even if you've watched it recently, watch it again. It's on Max right now. It's did you rent it? You rented it.
It's rentable. Yeah, it's on like Prime and Apple, etc. So you can rent it. It costs $4.
Yeah.
If you, like me, are angry at Max and will never watch Max again. Which probably won't last very long anyways, because I don't think that they're going to survive. But at least not in their current form.
Yeah.
So yes, that's going to close us out for this week. Next week, I think we're doing Gone Girl.
We are, which when's the last time you watched Gone Girl, Lauren?
Never. Right? I've never seen Gone Girl. I've read the book. And you know what? I read the book and I was like, I don't need to see that. I'm good. Yeah. But I am agreeing to see it. And I'm interested. I would be interested to see like what I think of it, to be totally honest. So yeah, so that's gonna be, we're gonna do Gone Girl next week. I do know that if you have not read the book or seen the film and you're gonna listen to that episode, definitely see the film, because I think that otherwise there's gonna be a lot of spoilers. I promise you that.
Yeah, watch the film. I haven't read the book in a long time, so the focus is going to be on the movie, not on the book, because I don't remember the book as well. And I don't have time to read it this week. So
I think that the basic plot is probably still the same, but I will let you know.
It is.
So that is going to close us out for this week. As always, thank you so much for listening. And thanks so much to our patrons, who include Abby, Ali, Audra, Brian, Connor, Estefania, Ferdinand, Heather, James, Janine, Judy, Carriata, Matt, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Noel, Robert, Steve, Sharon, and Tao. Thank you guys for supporting us. If anyone is still owed buttons and stickers, please let me know. I think everything has been sent out, but if I've missed someone, just shoot us a message and I'll get that out to you immediately. And if you want to join their number, our Patreon is patreon.com/citizendame. You also get access to our awesome bonus episodes. And we're doing the entire series of Our Flag Means Death right now. So definitely time to subscribe. We are now to the point of the pain and suffering that I don't like, and I don't want to do this anymore.
It's going to get better.
I love it. It's terrible. I hate it, but I love it. So that's patreon.com/citizendame. We also have our Etsy store, etsy.com/shop/citizendamepod, and a Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/citizendame. And you can get in touch with us a number of different ways. Our website is citizendamepod.com, and our email address is citizendamepod@gmail.com. We always love comments, anything you want to say to us, as long as it's polite. And if you would like for us not to read it out loud on the air, then just let us know, and we will. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Citizen Dame Pod, sort of on Twitter, I guess. And we are on Letterboxd at Citizen Dame. We are Letterboxd HQ, and you can find links to our episodes and articles and all sorts of fun stuff there as well. And of course, you can get in touch with us individually. Karen, where are you?
I am on the socials, especially Letterboxd and Instagram. That's the best place to find me, at Karen M. Peterson.
And I'm on Letterboxd and Instagram at LH Business. I think that'll close that for this week. We'll talk to y'all later.
Bye.
You got a better idea? I did once. You did once. Have you been to Mexico, Jack Twist? Huh? Because I hear what they go to Mexico for boys like you.
Hell yes, I've been to Mexico. Is that a fucking problem?
I'm gonna tell you this one time, Jack fucking Twist. And I ain't fooling. What I don't know, all them things that I don't know, could get you killed if I come to know them. I ain't joking.
Yeah, we'll try this one. And I'll say it just once.
Go ahead.
Tell you what, we could have had a good life together. Fucking real good life. Had us a place of our own. But you didn't want it, Ennis. So what we got now is Brokeback Mountain.